Because what you don't know about energy can kill you. Here's Alex Epstein.
Welcome to Power Hour. Sitting in for Alex Epstein today, I'm Don Watkins, Director of Education at the Center for Industrial Progress. And with me is CIP's Head of Research, Stefan Henne. Stefan, how's it going?
Hey, it's great, Don.
All right, well, we'll jump in with our first story. So several projectiles struck the largest oil processing plant in the world in Saudi Arabia last Sunday, and it led to a series of fires that took out nearly half of Saudi Arabia's oil production, which is 5% of the global daily oil output. And as a result, we've seen oil prices increase by about 15%, and it is, there's a discussion of how long it's going to take to fix everything with, I think the latest estimates I saw from IHS Markit estimating probably 30 to 120 days before everything is back online. And, there's a risk that it could be even larger. The Trump administration has blamed the attack on Iran, with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, saying that it was an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply. And, this is the latest of several attacks that have taken place on Saudi Arabia's energy infrastructure in recent months. And, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Certainly, it's quite fraught with foreign policy implications. But one thing that occurred to me listening to all of this was many of the leading Democratic candidates for the presidency want to ban fracking. And if you think, this was pretty painful, given the fact that we have a massive contribution to the worldwide oil supply from the United States. But if that had not existed, if they had actually already been in power and already banned fracking, you can just imagine how catastrophic this could potentially be. And one way to think about it is that basically what the Democratic candidates want to do is they want to send a more polite form of drones and cruise missiles to attack the United States energy supply. So, their goal is not that prices rise by 15%, but much, much more. And if you just think about the fact that oil is such a vital requirement of human life that countries go to war for it, and I think properly, that is, if there's a resource that the survival of your citizens depends on, and you need to protect that resource, and it is such a great achievement that now we don't have to go to war solely on the grounds of protecting access to that resource, because we have this incredible domestic energy industry, to voluntarily call for destroying that energy. And that, I think, is that automatically disqualifies you from the presidency. And that is even setting aside just the catastrophic effect it would have on the lives of your citizens. But just from a security perspective, that we would want to leave our access to energy in the hands of these very unstable and often unfriendly countries, I think is really unconscionable. Now, there's more to say about it. I think part of the context that is alive here is it's not just an issue that Saudi Arabia is an alleged ally, which I think is problematic, and that Iran has attacked their oil infrastructure. But of course, Iran has been attacking the United States for decades. So we'll see how this plays out in the foreign policy front. But purely from an energy perspective, I think it's worrisome, and it's and it's only made less worrisome by the fact that we have had the freedom to produce energy. Stefan, have you followed this story at all?
Yeah, but I just want to make a more general point, because the discussion often then goes we are so dependent on foreign oil, and even if we are not, this sort of impacts our domestic oil and energy prices, and it's a constant threat, and that's another reason why we should get off oil and gas. But it's not like other energy technologies wouldn't be vulnerable to things like that, right? So Iran has previously threatened to shut down an important oil trade route through its local waters, the coastline. And other technologies are also complex and require international trade. So it's not like the United States or Pax Americana, or however you want to call it, the hegemonial role of the United States would vanish if you could find something that actually replaces oil. So international trade is very important if you want to build a nuclear power plant or a solar panel or a wind turbine or a gas power plant. You know, everything will be impacted by this kind of threat of trade disruption. And it's not like, oh, America can cut half its defense budget just because we found something better than oil. That will not happen. And so this kind of terrorist attack will always target something that is vital. So in this case, it's a testimony to the importance of oil, of course. But, you know, enemies of free markets and of free countries can target vital trade routes and other infrastructure just as easily. And one of the big and interesting points here was that what I read today is that Saudi Arabia actually has a stockpile of oil to fulfill the contractual obligation. So they have a sort of trade obligation on a daily basis to deliver certain amounts of oil to other countries. And they can, like, in the short term, make up for the production loss, not entirely, but they can at least minimize the damage somewhat. So, and you couldn't, of course, if some vital piece of infrastructure that delivers something like grid power, you couldn't replace it as easily. So the stockpiling of oil is an important security item here. And one more point, just imagine how great it would be if some other players in the global oil market would be as free as the United States, notably Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves on the planet, which has seen a massive decline recently because of the unfree or anti-freedom policies implemented there. So the diversification would be a great strategy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a mistake that's often made to equate desiring energy security, which I think is a legitimate value, with desiring energy independence. Whereas what you want is you want a division of labor and you want free trade with friendly countries. But there is a real value in not being dependent on, you know, like I said, either countries that are unable to defend themselves or countries that are hostile. And certainly to be artificially dependent, I think is a great mistake. But yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, the fact that we get energy from countries like Canada and could get oil from energy from countries like Venezuela, if they weren't going down such a awful path, like, that is a virtue, not something to be shied away from. Stefan, what's your first story?
So since electric vehicles are such a hot topic right now, I thought we should talk a bit about Norway. And just recently I read an article on oilprice.com that deals with the policies that have made Norway such a success story, at least if you listen to the advocates of the technology. And so in 2019, so far, about half of new cars purchased in Norway were electric vehicles. Now, this is a country with about 5 million citizens, so it's not a huge market, but it's notable that so many people, such a high share of people would go and buy an electric vehicle in this country, in particular because it's a very northern latitude country, so low temperatures, particularly in the winter, are not really good for the capacity of battery electric vehicles. So what's not to like? Norwegians just love their electric vehicles, right? So the total share is now above 10% and still rising. So isn't that something we should emulate if we want to get of oil, of have an alternative to liquid fuels. And in this oilprice.com article, it is pointed out that this is not the result of a competitive product entering the market and then just steamrolling fossil fuel cars or diesel cars and gasoline cars, but it's a massive distortion of the vehicle market in Norway. So just a few examples here. Electric vehicles are exempt from the 25% value-added tax at purchase and also other taxes. And they get free public parking and get free charging very often on public parking spaces. And they also can use additional lanes like bus lanes and so on, which the fossil fuel powered cars cannot get. And on the other side of this, the internal combustion engine cars, so gasoline and diesel cars, will have to pay special taxes on the fuels, on the cars, and so on and so forth. So there's a very massive favoritism going on in favor of electric vehicles, and so as a result of this, a conventional internal combustion engine car costs several $1,000s more at purchase, and it's significantly more expensive to operate. So everything is rigged against fossil fuel cars, and everything is rigged in favor of electric vehicles, of course. And this amounts to a benefit of about $8,000 per vehicle, which only counts the purchasing advantage of the electric vehicles. And so the total subsidy expenditure of the government of Norway is $2 billion per year. So this doesn't sound a lot to an American, but in Norway, as I said, there are only 5 million inhabitants, so this is quite a lot. And if you would scale this up to the entire vehicle market, if everyone would buy an electric vehicle in Norway, that would be over $20 billion in subsidies per year, and that would dwarf many welfare expenditures on the government budget. And so, in my view, the real headline about the success would be, despite absurd amounts of subsidies and other market distortions, many Norwegians still don't want electric vehicles. So why would anyone sane not want an electric vehicle if the government essentially says, if you're buying an internal combustion engine car, you will have real problems. You will be in the bad lanes on the road. You will have to buy super expensive fuel that we put a special tax on, and the electric vehicles will get their power for free on public parking spots that are also free for them. And so every time you go somewhere in the public space and look for a parking lot, you will be disappointed not to have an electric vehicle. But still, about half of Norwegians every year will not buy an electric vehicle. That's a difference in utility between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine cars.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me just the celebratory nature of these claims. Like, look at how EVs are taking over the country. It's, when MP3 players first came out, there was one that came out by Microsoft called the Zune, which was just like complete joke, and nobody liked it, and it was awful. But you could just imagine if Microsoft had decided to, play the game where it got subsidized so that it cost, hundreds of dollars less than the Apple MP3 player, coming out and saying like, look, we're crushing iPod. We are, this is the music player of the future. It's like, no, you're the welfare case that's costing us a bunch of money, and you're still so lousy that only 50% of the people are willing to put up with you, even at this ridiculous advantage. And so it's like, look, I have nothing inherently against EVs, but when you have a whole society that's basically forced to subsidize something that's so inferior that even with these kind of massive subsidies, you still are leaving about half of your citizens saying, yeah, no, I want nothing to do with it. Like, that is just really absurd. And one of the things that it does, and this is what nobody talks about, is it actually holds back. The more that you have this artificial life support of an industry by government, the more that it holds the industry back, because it reduces the competitive pressure ever to become really good, and particularly to become good on price, so that even if they can fix the price problem. They still have the implicit price of having to stand around while a thing charges. And, we've talked about some of the other problems with EVs, like range and the scalability. But, at least they should have every incentive to try to really solve the problem and provide affordable transportation rather than just the illusion of affordable transportation that comes from government support. Right. My next story goes to, I saw a bunch of stories this week about Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old climate activist who's in the U.S. right now getting ready for the upcoming UN climate summit that I'm sure we'll have lots to say about. And I read a few interviews with her, and there's just a bunch of points that she made that I actually found quite interesting. So I'll just read a few of them, and I'll have a few interjections along the way. So in one interview, she makes the point that what I want to do now is, what I want people to do now is become aware of the crisis that is here. And she says that includes shaming those who need shaming. It's what I've been doing for quite a while now, and it actually has a lot of impact when you speak truth to power, when you don't bother to be polite because this is such a serious crisis and we cannot focus on what we can and cannot say. Now we must speak clearly about what is happening. When asked how she found the confidence to speak so clearly, Thunberg said, "I just know what is right and I want to do what is right. I want to make sure I have done everything in my power to stop this crisis from happening, to prevent it." And I actually think that's there's a lot that's admirable in that attitude, in the sense of if you think that something's right, you should be willing to speak out. You should be polite. And my real question is, why in the world don't we see fossil fuel supporters doing the same thing? That is, you hear all the time people pointing out, look, the fossil fuels are vital to our economy. They can't be replaced. And yet you hear almost no public voices. And to the extent that you do, including people in the industry whose very jobs and potentially freedom, is at risk, given that some of these executives could literally be thrown into prison, depending on who gains power. The fact that we're the point about, well, we have to be polite and we can't say anything, critical about solar wind, even though, having laws that outlaw fossil fuels and replace them with solar and wind would be a catastrophe for your friends and your family and the entire country. And the idea that we're just going to tiptoe and be polite and nobody has the confidence to speak out and say, this is completely outrageous, morally wrong, and destructive, and that the only people who are speaking out in that way are completely ignorant 16-year-olds who want to take away our freedom to use power. I mean, that is, that outrages me much more than the media's fawning over Thunberg. She goes on, there a few more points she makes. She was asked what was the most important thing the public could do to help prevent the climate emergency, as the media now calls it. And her answer, I thought, was pretty interesting. She said, "The key is to try to understand the crisis. I think that once you fully understand the climate and ecological emergencies, then you know what you can do as well. And of course, there's a lot of things you can do in everyday life, but we cannot be focusing on these individual things you can do. We have to see the full picture." And I mean, I definitely agree with her that the number one thing is to understand the issue and even to understand the full picture. But of course, she can't actually be talking about the full picture because she's never talking about the value of energy, including the value of affordable energy to help us cope with the challenges of climate. But nevertheless, that is that focus on understanding being at the forefront of the issue, I think, is really crucial, because that's why I don't think this is something that, for people who do want to stand up, this is not about holding placards and chanting, and it's not, about having or only having, some clever memes or some clever, 2-minute YouTube videos, it is actually help people understand the superiority and indispensability of fossil fuels, and help them understand the true nature of its side effects, including the impact of CO2 on the climate. And it's an actual real education in energy and its side effects that I think are necessary in order to know what's right, and then in order to persuade others of what's right. And then I'll end with a few more points she makes. When everyone else seems to just compromise and have this double moral that's, yeah, this is important, but also I can't do that right now and I'm too lazy and so on. I can't do that. I want to walk the walk and practice as I preach. So that's what I'm trying to do, because if I am focused on something, and if I know something and I decide to do something, then I go all in. And it seems like others are not doing that right now. So, unquote. And one final point I'll make about this is she definitely has not gone anywhere close to all in. That Thunberg, despite warring against fossil-fueled civilization, is still a parasite off that civilization, couldn't survive without that civilization, couldn't have gotten to the United States without that civilization, and couldn't be waging her war in that civilization without relying on it. And so, no, the only way to go all in if you oppose fossil fuels is basically to abandon society, is to abandon civilization, and you could go live like a primitive somewhere, although even then you'll be cashing in on all of the knowledge that you got while you were raised in that civilization that was only made possible by fossil fuels. But I mean, I think that, as much as this is a completely ignorant person who there's no reason that we should be listening to, and we're only listening to because, she's a puppet for politically correct ideas, I think this moral clarity that she has and conveys, and this willingness to bluntly make distinctions between good and evil, that is something that really should be emulated, but it should be emulated from an intellectual, informed perspective, and from a perspective that actually values human flourishing, rather than this completely let's call it politely violating this very dictum, confused ravings of a 16-year-old. Stefan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think your last point is really hitting the nail there, because there's something putting me off with this activist. And, there's a German version, Luisa Neubauer, of her in the German language realm. And so notice how these high school teenagers never engage in any real discussion. They never, as you said, they are not intellectually informed. They say, I want you to panic about something that I don't define. And so it's almost like a religious theme where some revelation comes from somewhere else that I can't explain, but I just know the truth, and everyone who's against that truth is evil, and everyone who's for this is good. And so it's not... So the moral clarity needs to be based on something that is explainable and real and informed. And, then you can say, oh yeah, this is like something like fascism. You can explain why that is bad and why it needs to be fought. And then, you can say, well, this is what we should do, and this is what government should do. But these climate activists, these low information climate activists, I would say, they are not speaking truth to power. They are threatening government power, which is the strongest and most violent power imaginable, against people who keep us alive every day. And so this moral outrage needs to be not based on some emotional attachment, but on some very rational, careful analysis on what's the right course of action, and how do we get our power or energy that powers our civilization. And you can't just take that away. And it's really, to me, it's a real outrage that nobody asks them, complex questions about the actual thing going on with not only climate but also with energy, right? So because there are serious questions. If you follow the wrong prophet here in this theme, you're going to kill a lot of people, and that's a big responsibility. And so we can't infantilize this issue, and I think these activists are doing that.
Yeah, and I definitely want to underline that point that you made, because I was being slightly tongue-in-cheek. It's like, I definitely don't think that this is like, this is not the right approach to the issue, just getting the conclusion wrong. Like, it really is an issue of, you need to have understanding. But what I think is just striking to me is how people who actually do have an understanding, who have thought about this issue, who understand the value of energy, who understand the state of climate science, it is very rare that they have any sort of backbone and any sort of, uncompromising moral attitude and willingness to name those things. And the few who do, we deserve eternal gratitude toward, and particularly given that they're actually speaking truth to power, because they're the ones who are increasingly being silenced, and who some people literally want to ban from the debate. And and so it's more vital than ever when you have that kind of dynamic, when the people with an actual understanding and willing to speak truth to power are increasingly drowned out of the debate. In fact, one of the things that has happened in the last few weeks is it's become clear that Google it's not right to put it as censoring it, but they're making Alex's Prager video on the Green New Deal very hard to find, so that if you search for what's the deal with the Green New Deal, the exact title of his video, you don't get any videos with that in the title. Instead, you get a bunch of things praising Ocasio-Cortez that are viewed much less than his video, which has, well over 1 million views. And certainly Google and YouTube have the right to do that, though they should be open about what they're doing. And though it should be very disturbing if an important, crucial debate is being regarded as undebatable. And, if you think about what's going on with an activist like Thunberg, it's like, she doesn't just want to shut down the energy that we need. She wants to shut down the other side. One of the things that she said is that she wouldn't meet with people who disagree with her, even if they wanted to, that, they should just shut up and listen to the scientists, and that she's here to basically frighten us into action. So please don't mistake my, what would you call it? Don't mistake the kind of point that I made for an actual view that there was anything positive going on there. I think it's, it is the complete opposite of what a climate thinker is, and that's what we should all aim to be, as well as activists for what we regard as the true position, which is that energy is vital and it's being opposed. Stefan, what's your next story?
Consulting organization McKinsey is regularly evaluating Germany's energy transition policy and the progress with that. And it just recently published another evaluation. So they do this since 2012. And the summary says that most of the goals of the energy transition policy will be missed, and that supply security will not be guaranteed after shutdown of nuclear and coal power, which is supposed to happen in the 2020s, 2030 realm. And so that's of course not news for power listeners, but it's important to understand that even these formal goals will not be reached, that there's already an issue with German energy supply, and particularly power supply. And if current trends prevail in emission reduction, the 2020 milestone will only be reached 8 years later, according to McKinsey. And the current favorable weather for solar and wind has led to a significant reduction for 2019 in the power sector, although significant imports of power had to happen to make that happen. But in the transport and industry, the emissions actually increased in the German economy. So we see here that talking about wind and solar even if they could be made very successful, they only solve part of the problem with getting off fossil fuels, which is the stated goal of the energy transition in Germany, of course. And over the next 10 years, over 40% of firm capacity in the power sector will be retired, and this will be mostly coal and nuclear. And without additional measures, McKinsey says supply security could be in danger. And their recommendation then is, and it's almost hilarious if it wasn't that serious, is that additional renewables and what they call flexible capacity, which of course means natural gas power, and some mothballed capacity should be kept as a reserve. And these are the things that Germany needs to focus on to make this energy transition successful. And by successful, they of course always mean like achieving the goals that the German government has set, not having secure energy supply. And so in addition, some additional transmission lines need to come online, and the transmission bottleneck is actually a big issue here in Germany. If that's not resolved, the 2020 milestones might only be reached in the late 2030s, so even a decade later than they are by current trends. And so you can imagine this not in my backyard attitude being a real obstacle to building more and more transmission lines to get the intermittent power from solar and wind that is generated somewhere, in the North Sea and maybe needed in Munich in southern Germany. You need a lot of infrastructure capacity to bring that from A to B, and that is way behind of schedule. They also have something positive to say about goal achieving. So they say there's a quote-unquote stable renewable energy jobs, which only slightly declined. And I want to remind everyone that this was, in America it's supposed to be, but also in Germany it's supposed to be the big job growth machine, right? So this is a job of the future, and only slightly declined. So that's a success according to McKinsey. And the industry power rates are only 6.2% above the European average, down from 14% above EU average in 2012. And the residential power prices, of course, continue to rise because that's where the brunt of the cost will be paid for. And renewable energy, which also includes hydro and biomass and so on, is about 37% of power generation and might continue to rise. Power generation, of course, is different than consumption, but that's the data we get in the official databases. But we will see by 2023, when the remaining nuclear capacity is banned in Germany, according to current law, the country will probably become a net importer of power. And in the meantime, the government just this last week announced that it will spend another 40 billion euros, which is slightly more in US dollars, over the next 4 years on climate policies to cut the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% over the 1990 levels by 2030. And one point that's very important, they always take this 1990 starting point in the statistics. And that is because the reunification of Eastern and Western Germany led to a dismantling of the Eastern German heavy industry, which was quite a big emitter, of course. And so naturally, by the collapse of that Soviet-style economy, you get a lot of emission reductions, right? So that's already cheating. So a lot of people outside Germany don't know this context, but they always take this 1990 level as a starting point, because that's when the Eastern German economy still was putting out some heavy emissions, and then after that it collapsed in the 1990s. So that just shows that these climate commitments are a black hole for government spending, right? Because Germany will just continue every few years to reevaluate and say, oh, we need to spend more money on these goals. And then they will likely not achieve them as long as people are free to actually use more and more energy, because as long as Germans will get wealthier, we want to consume more resources. We want to, live a better life and longer and happier life. And this requires a lot of energy. This requires a lot of resources and products and being productive. And that requires a lot of energy. And much of that energy and most of that energy in Germany still comes from fossil fuels. And one of the things that's not covered by this evaluation, by the way, is the outsourcing of emissions in terms of imported products. So something that happens, you might imagine a country like America that has a shale revolution going on with cheap natural gas as feedstock for manufacturing and also low energy prices as a result of that. That draws a lot of the industrial capacity from a country that, like Germany, that is just punishing with taxes and high wages and so on the industrial sector. And so what happens, and if the German economy grows, is we are going to import more and more stuff from places like Southeast Asia, right? And so these products that we import will, of course, embody a lot of CO2 emissions. The manufacturing in China will, use coal power, and these are emissions for the same product that previously was maybe manufactured somewhere in Europe or even in Germany. And this is not accounted for. So it could well be that Germany is not actually on net reducing its emissions. Maybe it's even increasing its emissions, right? By consuming more and more stuff that requires CO2 emissions. But we won't know because this accounting is, I would say, a bit rigged in favor of showing too rosy a picture.
Even so, I would really like to hear, from all of these supporters of the Green New Deal and its variants, explain why you think you're going to do better than Germany. If you're saying, 10 years it will make the economy will be 100% renewable, it's what reason do you have to think that you're actually going to be able to do better than this, advanced economy that's really put forward a lot of effort to, I hate to even phrase it this way, but wean itself off of fossil fuels. And it would be interesting to hear, what they had to say in that front. My next story is the Trump administration is planning to significantly weaken federal rules that would have forced Americans to use more energy efficient light bulbs. And it would eliminate requirements that effectively meant that most light bulbs in the United States had to be either LEDs or fluorescent to meet the new efficiency standards. And surprise, surprise, environmentalists are up in arms saying that this is going to increase CO2 emissions. And of course, because they're very concerned with costs, that this will cost Americans money. It's funny that they worry about costs whenever it's in their favor, and whenever they want to impose incredible costs, it's, you have to, we don't need to talk about those. But in any case, while it's true that high efficiency lights like LEDs can reduce energy costs, it's also important to keep in mind that they also have upfront costs that are higher, and that for a particular consumer and a particular use, they might not make up that purchase price for a long time, and maybe not at all. And so the way that I think about this is, look, light bulbs are not necessarily the most important thing in the world. It's not necessarily a hill to die on, but this is definitely illustrative of just the central planning mentality of the Greens, that in the real world, each of us as individuals faces a unique cost-benefit analysis. It's not light bulbs in general, but I'm selecting them for particular use where maybe LEDs are more expensive, and I have to make a judgment about, will it lower my costs in my case over what time? And then it's not only financial costs that I can be concerned with. Aesthetics is a real value, and I can have real reasons for thinking that, no, I want a traditional kind of light bulb for whatever reason. And the whole central planning mentality says, no, we're going to make a one-size-fits-all decision, and your judgment is completely irrelevant. And then once you have that, then it becomes a real question. Well, okay, well, what if this central planner is wrong? And, what if they're wrong, not just about like the cost or value of a light bulb, but, say the affordability and reliability of solar and wind. One of the reasons why individual choice is so vital is like you get to direct your life, but also you take responsibility for your choices, so that, if you get something wrong, you're the one who pays the price. Whereas when you have these kind of collective decision-making actions, it's you have a bunch of people who don't bear responsibility for their choices and are able to impose responsibility, their choices, on others. And God only knows what their incentives are and the quality of their judgment. A further thought on this is, we've had a few pieces of good news recently. The Clean Power Plan is being rolled back. Methane rules rolled back. We have, this light bulb, a few other things that the Trump administration has done to try to slightly reduce, the some of the environmental regulations that have been strangling business. But on the other hand, what we have is on the other side is people competing for how fast they can just outlaw fossil fuels and take totalitarian control over energy and the economy. And that it's that latter side that is positioned as idealistic and has the high ground. And so, as much as there are these kind of good things happening at a very minor level, the overall trend, I think, is really frightening. And you can't rely on any administration making these kinds of small changes in today's context, as you need a dramatic change in the culture's evaluation of our energy alternatives and ultimately of their ideal. Because so long as you have a culture where the ideal is not impacting nature and people are not taught to look at the full context of our energy choices, then the best you're going to be able to do is slightly loosen the noose for a few years until the other side gets into power, and then, has the opportunity to strangle everybody way more. And it just becomes extremely hard to undo. And so, not to be pessimistic, but I think it's good to keep in mind, as we're considering something like a light bulb ban, that this, you have to see it in the context of the bigger picture and of the need to really profoundly change how people think about all these issues rather than see it solely on its own merits. Stefan, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I was a big opponent of the mandate for compact fluorescent light bulbs because they had such a bad lighting quality. And so people argued that you could actually save money with them. I'm not so sure that was true. But it's really important that you can, make your own decision because, as I said, governments can make wrong decisions and not all decisions make sense for every consumer. So how would a bureaucrat know whether I need a compact fluorescent or an LED or an incandescent light bulb? And just recently I read something about a new development where researchers made an incandescent light bulb, multiple times as efficient as the original version of that. So it's now in, closer to LEDs and other things than before. And so the bureaucracy will probably not react to that until years after and takes this into consideration. So I think everyone has an incentive to choose the best light source that they need. And I'm very happy with my LED spots in my ceiling right now that I'm sitting beneath. So, and I'm as much, use as much energy as you can advocate as there is. And I still prefer the LEDs, not so much because they're efficient, but because they look really great. And I think they will save me money in the long term. But yeah, it's important that we make our own decisions and that the government doesn't centrally plan the economy, because that's always a disaster. And I think it's a mood thing now, but there shouldn't be any kind of regulation on that. Like, it's not going to hold the progress. So there's not someone who says, well, I will use a microchip from the 1980s because it uses more energy. That's not going to happen. So people will make good choices for themselves, for their own money. And I don't see any reason why there should be any kind of regulation of light bulbs. So I've read a story in Politico of all places, and this is a story about how California has fared with its green jobs. So California is ahead of other states in the United States with this Green New Deal stuff. And so this article, interestingly, warned against these claims of how this will be a boost to the economy and create a lot of jobs. And of course, many Democratic presidential hopefuls are advertising their sort of billions and trillions of investments, and saying that, yeah, this is going to be the green economy and going to create a lot of jobs. And the article then describes this as an elusive term. What is really a green job? What counts as that? And it calls the California experience a mixed record. So here are 2 quotes from the article. California's mixed record of using public investments and environmental mandates to create quote-unquote green jobs raises serious questions about the promises of some Democratic presidential candidates to use economy-transforming investments in environmentally friendly technologies to put millions of people to work. And the second quote later then is, the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics stopped tabulating green jobs in 2013, as did California's Employment Development Department, after it found, quote, no discernible evidence that green firms were more likely to create jobs than non-green firms, unquote. But ultimately, I think this article fails to reveal the fundamental economic fallacy behind this green job narrative or idea, and gives California far too much credit for what it created there. But it highlights the importance of job numbers, right? So everyone on the left and on the right, in all debates and in political debates in general, talks about, yeah, we will create jobs, or the government will create jobs. And so it's essential to understand what jobs in this context is. And what is proposed by something like a Green New Deal. And so what they essentially do when they are proposing, yeah, we will, replace coal and nuclear and natural gas with wind and solar, and these technologies also create more jobs. And what they are proposing by this is, we will do essentially the same, like creating transportation services or grid power for our homes and industries, but in a more expensive and less efficient way. That is what they are really proposing here, because human labor, jobs, is an input factor, just like materials or energy is. And this means cost. So an analogy would be here, let's suppose Don and I would own a shale gas well, and we would just produce the same amount of barrels of oil every day, just as a neighboring well. But our special feature, our engineering innovation, is that we use 10% more labor. We need more work hours to produce the same amount of oil barrels. And everyone would say, yeah, that's insane. You would just have a cost disadvantage. You don't want more people to work for you to produce the same amount of oil, right? And productive operations, of course, want to reduce the amount of labor. So some of the economic progress is that we can produce the same amount of material like oil or computers or anything else with fewer and fewer work hours, less labor, create fewer jobs. That's progress in economic terms. And of course, you can use government force to use a technology that requires more labor and therefore higher cost, but that's not going to benefit the economy overall. So this narrative that you often hear in political debates is, oh yeah, we just replace technology A with technology B, and then we will, employ more people. That is a big warning signal that this is going to be quite expensive and make everyone poor overall. But there's also a more honest version of this. that it goes something like this. And I think Joe Biden had this, for example, in the Democratic debate. And this is, we are going to, and I think also Elizabeth Warren had this idea very prominently on her agenda. And this is like, we will make a government investment, of course there's always a government there, to become a technology leader in something like green technologies like solar, wind, battery electric vehicles, grid storage technologies and so on. We'll make a big investment. And then when we are the market technology leader, we will sell our products globally, and that will, domestically in the United States and create a lot of jobs. And that, that's a more serious version of this. But if this would really work, you wouldn't listen to power right now because the Soviet Union would have won the Cold War. If central planning and this kind of innovation thing would work, the world would look very differently. So this is quite debunked. And China has also debunked this idea by taking over the solar panel market, right? You might have heard that, the majority of American installation of solar panels comes from China because they use cheap coal power to manufacture large amounts of solar panels at very low prices. And so this is not like this green tech job machine, but actually, a Chinese job machine. And even if that was working, even if you could do that, as an American central planner and make this like super innovative move with government investments, globally, and everyone else would adapt to that and say, yes, we need to do solar, wind, and batteries for our grid power and nothing else. Then globally, the economy would still not be better off because we would still replace efficient technologies like coal and nuclear and natural gas with something inferior that drives up the cost. So Germany is a primary example. We just had this power hour. So this is like a really, really dishonest narrative. And I think if a politician thinks that this, and they have this rhetoric about World War II investment, and they should really call it a World War II sacrifice, because the American economy in World War II produced a lot of tanks and airplanes and ships and so on, and in this war effort. But it didn't make Americans wealthier. It was a huge sacrifice. Like things had to be rationed for the civilian population. And in England it was even worse because it was in more dire straits economically. And so you had this rationing going on, and you had, the wealth declined for the civilians while the industrial output was focused on the war effort, producing bombs that then would explode and benefit nobody but, would serve for the war goal, which was necessary at the time, of course. But that is a sacrifice, right? And an honest assessment of the situation would say, well, we need to do this, we need to invest this, we need to spend this government money and have an economic sacrifice. And then we would want an honest assessment of how much this will hurt. But what we get from, the Democratic presidential debates, for example, is, oh, no, it will be great. And at the end of the day, you will actually get a better job and you will save some money on it. We will destroy all the existing capital. We'll replace it with something that is, less productive, less efficient. But overall, we will all be winners on this, and we will be wealthier and better off ultimately. So now you would have to make a very complex case about how this brutal sacrifice now will benefit us 50 years later in terms of climate damage. And if you would actually make that assessment, like even in the published literature, we've talked about William Nordhaus, the Nobel Prize winner on climate economics. That damage doesn't justify what they are proposing right now. But of course, they can't have that discussion. So they are telling us, essentially lies about, how this Green New Deal will be so beneficial that you don't actually sacrifice. The government just knows better how to grow the economy, create more jobs, better paying jobs, and, save you money on your electricity bill. And that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, one just basic point is, like, there's no problem of how to create jobs, one of my favorite stories about the late economist Milton Friedman, I think he was in China at the time, but he saw some project where people were digging a ditch with shovels, and he said, wouldn't it be more efficient, to get some heavy machinery in here? And they said, oh, well, it's a jobs program. And his response was, oh, well, you didn't say it was a jobs program. If it's a jobs program, why don't you give them spoons? And you can always create jobs. You can just take away our ability to do things efficiently and productively. The real challenge is creating productive activities and productive businesses, and that takes discovery on a free market. It takes trial and error by entrepreneurs, and what that does is it creates productive jobs. It creates jobs that are actually increasing human beings' standard of living, because if your goal is just to create jobs, then you can create all kinds of welfare jobs that are completely inefficient and that in many cases shouldn't even exist. And that's what all of these sort of like government job creation programs are doing, is at best having more inefficient jobs, and at worst often anti-productive jobs where, when you're funding industries like the solar and wind industry that are actually harming our access to reliable, affordable energy, but the jobs creation is a benefit, but a derivative benefit, a derivative of actually figuring out the best way to produce things, and that is something that cannot be centrally planned. It can only be discovered by entrepreneurs taking risks with their own money and the money of people who voluntarily support them, and outcompeting rivals on a free market. And that's exactly what is absent from these dictatorial plans by the opponents of fossil fuels. If you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me, Don Watkins, at don@industrialprogress.net. And if you have any interest in a speech by Alex or anyone else from our team, we've got a lineup of great speakers at different price points, and you can just email me at don@industrialprogress.net. And similarly, if you have any messaging projects that you would like to have our help with potentially, we can schedule a brief discovery call to discuss your challenges and how we can help. Just email me. And finally, the best way that you can keep up to speed on everything that we're doing is to subscribe to our newsletter at alexepsteinlist.com. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week with some more great topics. Until then, this has been Don Watkins and Stefan Henna on Power Hour.
Power Hour. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of energy. Power Hour. The antidote to shallow thinking about energy issues.